Hi, welcome to today's live panel. I'm so excited to be talking about, again, employment, but how COVID has impacted women in the workforce. But before we go into that, I just want to make sure, do a quick check. Can everybody hear me okay? See me okay? So you could just drop a note, a message in the comments box. I'd really appreciate that. As usual, this is being streamed via StreamYard. So unless you give StreamYard permission, I won't be able to see your name when you leave a comment. Not a problem, but if you want us to be able to see your name, please give permission. So, okay, I can see people are starting to log in. So let's get going. Now, I want to introduce our first guest, Milva. Milva is the co-founder from Women in Pharma. Um, have we got? Here she is. So welcome, Milva. And our second guest today is Liesl. Liesl is based out of Belgium, and she is the founding partner at Treble 3L Consulting. Welcome, ladies. So
Thank you.
before we get going, I'm just going to pass it over to yourself, Milva. If you just want to tell the audience a little bit about who you are.
That's easy. That's something I can answer rather easily. I've been in the industry for in the pharma industry for quite a while now, over 3 decades. I'll stop to that without revealing my age. It's been an adventure. I started quite a few years back in Canada, and then I had international roles and outside of Canada for quite a long time, 20 years, 60 countries, and quite a few sets of suitcases were ruined throughout that. But it was quite an experience. A few years back, we started together with 4 other women in Canada, Women Leaders in Pharma, which is an association that has as a major mission is that of having women empowering women, and it's never been as relevant as in this last period with what we've all been living globally. So I'm also a mother of 2, boy and girl, hoping that what we do by doing rather than teaching will transpire to the next generation. So that's my other goal in life. Teach by doing. That's it.
Perfect. And Liesl, yourself, if you'd like to take a few minutes.
Hi, yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Liesl Bebb-McKay. I am indeed in Belgium, and I am the founder of a consultancy called Tribal. Our focus is on helping small businesses to grow, but we also have a program for women, specifically women founders. And that came out of my history, which is a very long one in investment banking. First of all in London, and then in Johannesburg for 18 years, investment banking strategy, and ultimately running a technology lab, so an innovation lab inside a bank before I moved to Belgium. But the whole time in banking, I was well aware of the impact of women in the workplace, and that was a passion, and we created an award-winning program in South Africa, looking at how do we change some of these gender dynamics inside the South African banking industry. And that's then encouraged me to keep this passion project going with the program that we have now, which is called Thrive, which is not about giving women skills, because it's not that women need training. It's more about getting them into a tribe with each other, because that's what we really need. We need one another professionally. And so that's kind of how I spend my days now. I sit on some boards, I do some work in the tech industry, and then we run the women's program.
Excellent. So, okay, so ladies, if you're ready, let's just dive straight in. One question I hear in one way, shape, or another. Does gender diversity even matter? Are there not bigger things to worry about? Milva, do you want to start there? How would you answer that question?
Well, I think that yes, there are important things to discuss right now. COVID, vaccines, vaccination rates, mental health. Yet, when we talk about diversity, gender diversity, or diversity and inclusion as a broader topic, it needs to be still at the forefront. This is going to be a topic that will be at the forefront, I think, for the next few generations. Equity, diversity, and inclusion, in my opinion, is no longer an option. It is something that we all need to strive for, as to make sure that we have a more balanced world in general. And if there's something that this pandemic has taught us, maybe, let's see, after the pandemic, if we're going to put in place and keep in place the good learnings that we thought, is that we need to have a more balanced approach and appreciate what we have, appreciate the differences. And, sometimes the differences are what makes us appreciate others more than the similarities. So I think that, yes, it needs to be at the forefront of everything that we do.
Yeah.
Liesl, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question because there's so much that we are worrying about at the moment. Are we safe? Are our families safe? There's so much in the press about COVID and other issues, and really, should we still be talking about gender? And I guess if I think back to when I started my career as a banker, when this activism really was so real for me, women were not in leadership. When I thought of the blockers that we had coming, I could never in my life have imagined that the single biggest blocker to the conversation we were having around gender would be an invisible virus. I would never have imagined, but I do think that it's the single biggest thing that is setting us back that we've seen in decades. I think it's setting us back years and years, mainly because women's lives have been so severely impacted. I read an article recently by Melinda Gates, and she was trying to give some context to what is this impact. And with just the huge amount of unpaid care work, so women just doing more home work rather than work, something like a 2-hour increase in that unpaid care work, it corresponds to a 10 percentage point decrease in women's ability to participate in the labor force, which is just huge. And if you think of the impact that is going to have on women going forward, should we be talking about it? Hell yes. And I think the bigger problem we've got is that we're almost going into this weird kind of societal thing where it's not okay to talk about things. If we're, we need to be politically correct. So let's not raise the volume on gender, right? And that again, it's just becoming such a negative impact for us as women and the march we've been leading for so many years. So I worry about it significantly.
Let me just ask you, why do you say that it's becoming politically incorrect to raise the question, and why do you say that?
I think people are really afraid to say the wrong thing. When I talk about diversity, so when I talk about race, what should I say? When I talk about gender, what can I say? When I talk about LGBTQ, what should I, what can't I, what won't I? Rather, do you know what? I'm just not going to say much. And I think that fear of speaking out is having a negative impact on diversity as a whole, on inclusion as a whole, but specifically for women, because people would rather speak about topics that are more in the news right now, frankly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And topics that are less dangerous, socially speaking, because right now what I feel that is happening is, unless you have the appropriate language, the language that is that of the professor lounge at the university, then you cannot talk about race, you cannot talk about women's issues, you cannot talk about gender, because then you're going to be crucified if you just say the wrong word in a sentence that could be misinterpreted. I mean, there are times, this is a time where we should not be focusing on the details. I think that we are losing a sense of reality of what we should be talking about, and just be honest and say, maybe I did say this wrong, but let's have the conversation. Let's not be afraid of having the conversation. And Liesl, I cannot be more aligned with you. I tend to, when I speak, I tend to keep a language that is everyday's language, because I think that I'm not here to pontificate on what should be, but rather have a conversation of where I think we should be going. And if everybody would put a bit of that and forget about the correctness of the conversation, but have the conversation, then maybe we could move things around a bit. And what you were saying about, the 2 hours of work extra, you look at stats, and there's so many stats that work against women. The fact that there's a decrease in daycare services because of the pandemic, that means that a lot of more women, because women still are the primary, caretakers of children, there's more women that will drop out of the workforce. You put the 2 hours, the daycare, and God knows what else there is out there. It is an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I read a report that said women are spending 3.5 more hours than men are, because men are also picking up some slack. Let's not, everyone is. It's just so much more, and it's not those 2 hours. It's more like 4 hours or 6 hours for some women. And I think the point you make, Milva, about conversation, in the work that we've done in the past in gender, people say, like, what's the single biggest thing for a corporation so that they can have impact when it comes to inclusion? And it's just give people permission to have the conversation. Give them a language. Make this a conversation that we have. And if we're not having conversations, we're stagnating.
I think also there seems to be, and I've said this on many of the panels, especially the D&I one last month, there seems to be this, if you're not agreeing with me, you must be wrong. Right. Yeah. So, and that's, I'm guilty as charged. I'm just like, oh, is this a conversation? Is this something I should say? Because the other person's not open to listening to a different perspective. So most people are listening to validate what they are thinking rather than listening to understand. So I think we've got a long way to go on that, but certainly we can do our parts to help move that forward, right? So let me ask you this question, and I'll put it to yourself to start, Liesl. COVID, as we all agree, we've just said, has had a massive impact on society as a whole, particularly women. Is the impact really as bad as it seems? And I know that's a strange question to ask, but I know men who are balancing work-life, children, and to your point earlier, this isn't about men are not picking up the slack, right? Because some men certainly are. But is just as a whole, has the pandemic impact? Is the impact as bad as it seems?
It's worse.
Oh, okay.
Honestly, I say it's worse because we're in a perfect storm. So there's just everything that can possibly go wrong, the perfect storm. First of all, we've got this historical bias and inequality that's existed structurally for women. Women are 20 to 30% of leadership on a very good day. In banking and technology, the industries I'm in, we barely get to 22% in leadership. So we've got this historical structural inequality. Then we've got all this fear of COVID, and I was watching such an interesting talk by Dr. Srini Pillay, you should Google it, where he talks about the type of anxiety that we're feeling now. So two things are happening. There's something called mortality salience, which is this massive awareness that we're going to die every day. That didn't used to happen. We didn't used to wake up every day and go, I can die. My parents can die. So we've got mortality salience, first of all. But then we've got a whole different kind of anxiety. We've got this anxiety that comes, which is called predatory anxiety. Something chasing you kind of puts you into fight or flight. So we're afraid of dying, something's chasing us, an invisible virus. When those two things happen from a neuroscience perspective, bias is put on steroids. We go straight into our bias. We go into our safe place, our belief systems. So that prevents us from doing all the things we should be doing when it comes to diversity. So structural inequality, these COVID fears that are increasing the bias, and then of course women just losing jobs and having all the extra work. It really is the perfect storm. So is it bad? Yeah, it's bad. It's worse. It's really worse than bad, in my opinion.
And to add to that, I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, when we were, trying to figure out, this thing has been going on now for a year and 3 months. When at the beginning we all thought it was going to be like 4 weeks lockdown and things were going to be better and whatever. Now, a year and a half later, we're looking at vaccinations. We're looking at not being out of the woods for another, 6 months? At the beginning, what there was for a lot of women was looking around and seeing what was next, and a lot of women took care of everybody else but themselves.
Yep.
We realized as a group of women that we were reaching out to each other and saying, okay, where do we go from here? That we were all feeling the same. That there was this anxiety, underlying anxiety and fear that we were, fear for your children, for, what you were talking about, Liesl. And the thing is that we realized that we needed to do something to support women in there. Because when you're alone, and that's the other factor that this pandemic has created, is isolation. Mm-hmm. Isolation is one of the worst psychological pitfalls of mental health. Because when you're isolated, then the recurring thoughts start to happen. You believe that you're unique. You're the only one that is feeling isolated, that is feeling that the world is falling apart. You're scared of talking about it because you go, I'm going mental. No, you're not. Everybody's feeling the same thing. And the fact that you're able to say it, to reach out to other people like yourself, and there is the gender factor here that is so important, then you're able to say, okay, I'm not the only one. I can, if I reach out and see if there are mechanisms that other women have put in place to survive and then maybe to thrive, then I can do it too. So empowering, bringing together, solution finding. That was one of the first things in the first months. Then something else happens. It's long stretch fatigue. We've been at it for a year and a half. Problems with school, no school. Can they go outside? Do you vaccinate? It's confusion. So having a place where you can let the guard down, talk, not be judged for what you're going to be saying, express your fears, and deal with them. I'm not saying that this is a psychological session and therapy. No, it's just being there for each other as a support system. Oh. So the perfect storm is definitely there. Add the isolation factor. It's a disaster in the making.
It is. What's so interesting what you're saying about the isolation factor and coming together is we learned quite a long time ago that what professional women need is each other. So you'll often hear women need a sponsor, they need a mentor, they need blah, blah, blah. What they actually need is other women that are in the same boat as them, that they can have conversations with. Because as you get further up in your organization into leadership levels, it becomes very, very lonely and you start to feel like you're the only woman in the room.
Yeah.
And what's happening now is this even worse, because women are having conversations about what's going on in their family lives, but they're not getting the opportunity to talk to other women in a professional capacity. So how do I sit and go, I'm just not coping with this zoominess all day long. I'm just looking at men through a screen. What do I do when I'm starting to feel like I'm being left out because others are going into the office and I can't because I've got all these responsibilities? There's no space to have these conversations. And I think one of the things we need to start thinking about to really help professional women is creating these spaces to have professional conversations around how you're feeling and how that's impacting your career.
And to add to that, Liesl, what happened during this pandemic, there has been I know with women leaders in pharma, there were quite a few women that reached out and said, we had a restructuring, because restructurings happened independently because they were planned. So I lost my job. What should I do? Well, what happened was something that I thought, because we created that safe space, women came together to support each other. Yes, they were competing for the role, but they were supporting each other. During the pandemic, I saw quite a few women finding work through the network of women, supporting each other in negotiating contracts. A few colleagues within the associations lost their work because of restructurings and got better positions. And while they were negotiating for better positions, they were contacting other women to, what do you think I should ask? This is what they offered. How should I consider the package? This is empowerment. Yes, you fight for the same thing. However, when all is done, you support each other.
But let
And
me ask
I
you
think
a
that
question.
is the best way to move forward.
Yeah, but Milva, let me ask you a question to that. For the men that are watching this, who's supporting women and what have you, what can they do? We're talking about women empowering women. I totally get all of that. But the men that are watching this, what are some of the things maybe they can do as leaders, as colleagues, peers, and things like that to help support women?
I think there's a lot men can do. Listen would be one of the first thing I would suggest any men to do. Really listen. I'm going to tell you a little anecdote about me. I've been married for 30 years to the same person. And it took me 15 years to understand one thing, which, most people think I'm an averagely intelligent person. It should have taken me less to realize this. In the middle of a fight, a discussion, not a fight, I was talking to my husband, who loves me, therefore has all the best intentions towards me. When I'm talking about work, he listens, he wants to participate. So I'm there and I'm talking about an issue I had at work. We were in the kitchen in our house, and he tells me, well, I think you should be doing this. And the voice starts going up a few decibels. And all of a sudden, between me and me, I realize that it's not the solution mode that he's into. It's the few decibels that he's raising because he's passionate. But his passion, I live it as an aggression. So my natural instinct is that to fight back. But if I fight back, the first reaction he's going to say is like, where's this coming from? When I tell men to listen, it's just listen. Don't solution. Don't, just listen. Once you've listened, maybe rephrase and tell us that you understood. Because most of the time I feel like I'm talking, he's either in solution mode or he's already thinking about the next thing that he needs to tell me, but is no longer really listening. So all this to say, I think the first thing to understand each other, to support each other, is to really listen to each other. Start with that. That will solve a hell of a lot of problems around there.
Oh,
Because if you understand the other person's point of view, odds are you'll be able to put yourself in somewhat of their shoes. Once you're there, half the battle's done, my opinion. But then again, as a trained psychologist, what else would I say?
Liesl, what would you add to that?
yeah, I would totally agree. Anyone who knows me knows I love watching absolute rubbish TV. And there's this one program I love. It's called New Amsterdam. It's about this hospital, and there's a doctor in the hospital. He's always running around doing crazy things. But the one thing this guy gets right is he's always asking, how can I help? And I think that's to the point. You know, listen. Don't try to be the guy coming in on the white horse. Listen and ask, how can I help? What do you need from me? Because it may not be what you think. It may be something very, very small or completely different to what you would have solved. But just like, how can I help? And then actually help, obviously. Do that thing if it's possible for you. But I think, yeah, listen and then ask them what they need to thrive.
And always talking about that specific program that you're talking about, it goes back to a thing that we were talking about before, is not being afraid of making mistakes, not being afraid of saying the wrong thing, not being afraid of having a confrontation or a discussion that is animated. If we don't have, my worst fear about gender, equality, equity, inclusion is, if people stay in the closet and don't talk about how they feel about any topic, how are we ever going to understand each other? We don't need to agree on everything, but if we don't talk about it, then for sure we're never going to agree on anything.
So true. I mean, it's this thing about we only know what we know. Nobody's walked in everyone else's shoes. So often for men, it's so confusing. They haven't walked the shoes. And a really stupid story is one when I was in a bank having coffee with the CEO one day. And I said to him, are you ever going to fix this paving? It's like life-threatening for me and my high heels. He was like, what are you talking about? The paving? Because he doesn't wear high heels. And it's the silliest story, but it makes the biggest points. If you haven't walked in my high heels, you don't know the paving is very dangerous. But it's the same for so many other things. If we can't walk in another person's shoes. All we can do is say, hey, how does it feel walking in those shoes? Tell me about it. What can I do to help you thrive? Let's have a conversation.
You know, when Black Lives Matter happened, my best friend happens to be Black and Sicilian. I'm Italian, and she always says that the Italian trumps the Black in this situation. However, when George Floyd happened, I reached out to her and I said, how are you feeling?
Mm.
Because as a mother,
Yeah.
as a Black person, as a wife, I wanted to know how she felt. While I could imagine, if I didn't ask her, I would never know. I would assume, and there's nothing worse in life than assuming that you understand somebody else. Ask them. Odds are you'll have two things coming for you. One thing is that you show interest to somebody you care for. Second, odds are you'll learn something. You'll understand something else that you assumed was different. So it also always goes back to listening. I asked the question. She goes, you know, not even in my family we talk about it.
Wow.
I think I'm going to call my sisters. And I said, Sandra, you know, we always talk about everything. So Sand, you know, let's get at it if you feel like it. Because I would like to know, what did you tell your son? What did you tell your daughter? Her son and my daughter often go out together. And that sparked a conversation with the kids.
Yeah.
You know, the kids told us, yeah, we're scared when usually my daughter drives when they're out. Because he's Black. Odds are he's going to get stopped more than my daughter if she's driving. for random controls. Like, really? I didn't know before I asked. So ask. If you genuinely care, ask. Odds are you'll learn something.
Point. Let me bring in a question here. So McKinsey estimate that 4.5% of women employment is at risk during the pandemic, and this is globally, compared to 3.8% for men. Now, given the industries that both of you participate in pharma and technology, what can we do to ensure that we don't find ourselves in a gender crisis? So if you want to speak in particular how it relates to pharma for yourself, Milva.
Well, to be quite honest with you, I think we already are in a gender crisis. If you look at reports, be it the McKinsey report that you mentioned, or there's even another report that came out from Pricewaterhouse. There's a few reports that came out of UN Women. I mean, all point in the same directions. We're not going forward, we're going backwards, because the employment figure that you just quoted is just employment. Now, you don't have all the compounding factors around that. Those are just employment at risk. Add to that mental health issues deriving from this pandemic. Add to that loss of daycare opportunities. Add to that whatever you want, because the list could go on. Like, we could stay here till tomorrow to discuss about the list of things that have changed with this pandemic. I think we are in a crisis mode. We're no longer thinking about it's not the world as we used to know it. It's going to be something new, something we need to adapt to, something we need to get back into understanding how we're going to live moving forward. I think we need to have that conversation and retake up the gender equity and inclusion discussions. And we're back. We went back a few years.
So what are some of the things you're doing in your organization then, that to if we are in this gender crisis, what are some of the things women leaders in pharma are putting in place, initiatives and things like that?
Well, I think the first and foremost thing that we're doing is really creating this safe environment that we were talking about earlier, to be able to talk, not the faculty lounge type, let's have a happy hour and discuss, what's happening in our lives. It's not therapy session, and it's not the proverbial bitching session. It's just work. Whatever else we need to discuss. We have a book club. We have podcasts where we discuss the wildest topics, but it's having an outlet where you can choose to enter in a conversation, be it about the imposter syndrome. It's all about having a safe space. It's also about making sure that people don't feel the isolation. And we're starting to be able to go outside, beautiful days. We're able to start socializing again. But during the pandemic, we needed to have an outlet for socializing. So while we were all being zoomed out because of meetings during the day, having another Zoom just to make sure that you check in for your mental health is another thing. So we're doing small things. You can't do much more. But I think making women feel empowered is already one of the best things you could do.
Okay, so I've got a question that's come to my mind, and this is excuse my ignorance here. Pharma, the pandemic, you would assume, obviously I'm assuming this incorrectly, that just the very nature of it being pharma, the pandemic, women from an employment perspective wouldn't be impacted as much because they're going to be in high demand. We need to get the population vaccinated. We need to get all the other healthcare parts of it. So I guess I'm a little surprised or maybe I'm just ignorant in that, but I just would have thought the fact that it's pharma, it would be a different story.
Well, it isn't really a different story in the sense that, before we had people visiting physicians. Well, you can't visit anybody anymore. For a year, hospitals are off the grid, clinics are off the grid. So you have that aspect of work that is completely out the window. All the commercial part, while you could do marketing all you want, if you don't access your stakeholders, well, marketing becomes, so there's that part. And that's for losing their jobs. Because of what you said, something else happened. Everybody else that worked in COVID related were working a lot more from home with children or parents that needed care. My parents are 85 and 86. I have an aunt that lives next to me that doesn't have anybody to support her. Just going to do the groceries at the beginning of the pandemic was a nightmare. It was 5 hours, go to the place, wait in line, get the stuff, clean everything, because at the beginning you had to clean everything that you brought home, deliver it to their houses, get home. That's a 5-hour trip, something that would take you half an hour before. So, and that on top of the work. And I have grown-up children. The working from home, then it's a habit you need to learn, in the sense that, not everybody has a workspace of their own in the house. So you're in the kitchen, so you have to unpack every time. Sometimes you feel guilty because you prepared lunch for your kids, so you took time away from work. After supper, odds are you'll go back to work because you feel guilty. It's a never-ending nightmare. So because we don't know how to be balanced from working from home all the time, there's a higher risk of burnout. So all those compounding factors mean that, yes, in the industry, we were fortunate or really not fortunate. Angelina Bratway, I see a comment that she made. All the clinical trials that went on for COVID, we had colleagues that worked in the COVID area. Those ladies were like, they really needed resuscitation after the vaccines were approved, because they worked 80 hours a week from home during a pandemic. We needed to be there for each other, be it because you lost your job or because you were going crazy with 80 hours a week. So, and especially in a pandemic, when you feel that you are contributing to the health of the global population, you don't pull back. The women don't pull back, and that's for sure. So
that completely makes sense, because when I was thinking and when I asked the question, I was like, okay, I guess the piece I haven't heard you say, and maybe it's beyond the scope of today. I guess when I was asking that question, it was going through my mind. I was thinking, surely the pharma companies have put initiatives in place, support in place, whatever that might look like, to really enable the workforce to be able to, yes, get those trials done, work 80 hours a week. I just assumed,
we're talking
maybe
about
incorrectly.
I think that everybody, and I mean everybody, was caught by surprise by this pandemic. So the reaction, yes, came, but it came after. At the beginning, it was just like survival mode for everybody. And think about it. We are in an industry that is an elephant in terms of agility to move and take a new direction. I'll be honest with you, everybody in the industry is surprised that we managed to get vaccines in a year. Think about it. Most products that get submitted to the FDA takes 18 months reviews. The COVID vaccines got 3 weeks, which does not mean it wasn't done properly. It was done most certainly in the most transparent way ever done, because it was public. Yet, this is what we were dealing with, an industry that is extremely slow to react. And it reacted fast, which means somebody had to work a lot more than usually 40 hours a week or 35. So,
Yeah,
yeah, it's
totally.
tough. And it's not only the health industry that went through that. If you looked at the healthcare, hospitals, burnouts, I
Yep.
mean,
It's
It's
definitely,
exactly the same.
sorry, what were you going to say,
It's
Lee?
exactly the same in the tech industry. So just in the same way that healthcare got very busy, tech got mad busy. People were caught without processes. Everyone needed new tech, a new front end, new development, and people were burning out. So people were working harder than ever, and women were quitting. Because you can't be working harder than ever in your kitchen next to your 2 kids trying to do mathematics. Yeah.
I had a friend that was working on a COVID vaccine. She's in the United States, and her daughter was first grade, and she was in an international. This is not funny, but it is funny. She was in an international meeting, and all of a sudden she had to say, "Excuse me." She was seeing her daughter from the background climbing into the countertop of the kitchen. So everybody saw it. It's only when she looked at herself 2 seconds that she realized, everybody realized. So she had to quit the meeting, go and run. I mean, how many cats, dogs, husbands did you see during meetings? It's all of an adaptation. I mean, it's been a mad place just getting used to this. And it's been a good place also because people now are a bit more open to being vulnerable. Like you see a cat passing by, nobody goes into a frenzy because the cat dropped by. Before, it would have been highly unacceptable, but we're a bit more vulnerable.
Do you remember that YouTube video of somebody being interviewed by the BBC and his kids come in the background, and the wife just like sneaks in, tries to, and look how much publicity that got. And now you're right, people don't blink an eyelid, or they should not be blinking an eyelid when that type of thing happens. Lisa, I've got a question for you, just follow up from that. Did and I know we're generalizing here, but do you think the banking industry was able to pivot fast enough from a care perspective? I get it. None of us saw this coming. None of us had it planned. But do you think they put enough emphasis on people's personal well-being, as well as obviously the profits and then what have you?
I think banks, much like large corporations, have pivoted, and much to the story Milva's told, maybe later than what would have been ideal, just because everyone was left in a huge, big shock trying to deal with crisis. I think the first 6 months for all of us was just dealing with crisis. And then we started realizing, shoot, we need to be having new social contracts with our teams. We need to be dealing with psychological issues. I think banks, unlike perhaps pharma, have this amazing ability to pivot really quickly. The industry, I mean, it's been around since Mesopotamia. It's just so innovative. That's how it survives. It pivots. And I think we've seen banking products. I think we've seen changes in the way banks work, changes in ways of work that will sort of lead into the future. And I think this is the opportunity of it all, really. So as hard as this has been, let's not let a good crisis, we must take advantage of the crisis. And this is the fourth industrial revolution. I didn't believe any of the other stuff, even though I've been in the fintech space for most of my life. I was like, in revolutions, people die. No one's dying in, 2017. Now people have, and we've seen social change. This is the fourth industrial revolution. Let's not let it go to waste. Let's use that we can work from home to the advantage of women. Let's use the fact that we can now change working hours from being, what was invented in the Industrial Revolution, 8 to 5. Let's change that. Let's fix the way it is. Let's fix pay equity. If we don't, well, then we're not taking advantage of this gift in a way.
So it brings me on to another question. I know we've discussed some of the reasons and the impact, but is it really all COVID? right? So the impact on women in the workplace, is it really all COVID, or is it COVID is just part of it and we were going to end up here at some stage? Were we heading down this path of, like everything else, right? Something new comes out, people talk about it, and then something else comes along and people forget, and people go back to old ways and patterns and things like that. So do you think it was always going to be women are going to get championed as long as we're talking about it, then it'd be like, okay, whatever? Or do you really think COVID has played a massive role, and had COVID not happened, would we be on that upward trajectory?
The trajectory wasn't so upward. It was
Okay.
still, if not going backwards already. I think COVID's just accelerated
Okay.
where we were getting to. And there's something so interesting. I've been doing a piece of research with my colleague, Roy Clark, who you know, around what is diversity and how do we actually live it and how do we create more inclusion. And something we've realized in bias is that when you're a victim, it's very hard to recognize that others are also victims. So what happens when we think of ourselves as humans, when we think of the human race, it's quite easy for us to connect at that level. Homo sapiens, and we've seen that in this crisis, we've seen us really come together. At the other end of the spectrum, as people, we love to recognize individuality. We simply love to see someone being amazing. We love that about each other. We love to watch it. The kind of disconnect happens in the bubbles in between, where we have these affiliations. And in those affiliations where we start to feel victimized. I feel victimized because I'm a woman. I feel victimized because I'm a COVID healthcare worker. I feel victimized because I'm gay, whatever it is. And the problem comes is that when we go into victim mode, it's very difficult for us to realize that although we're a victim in one context, we may be a perpetrator in another. And it's quite hard for us to go, what if this is my fault? Because you're so busy going, I'm having a terrible time. It's COVID. This is terrible. Rather than going, how much of someone else's terrible time is a result of the stuff I'm doing? And I think that's where COVID's been the worst of all. Because we're all so busy just worrying about our own survival, we're not looking up and going, gee whiz, what could I be doing for someone else? What is that person suffering with? What kind of structural inequality am I perpetrating? We just can't do it when we're so in the victim. And I think that's the biggest thing that COVID has brought.
Interesting. Milva?
Fully agree. I think that the isolation factor, it plays very much into fears. Fears of what's different instead of appreciation of what the difference can bring to your life. It's been rough. It's been rough, and I agree with Liesl. We're already going back. Before COVID, I just think that COVID put a foot on the accelerator. I think that what we need to do, I mean, there's a lot of things we need to do, but to get out of that victim mode, you need to first recognize that you choose that role, because victim is how you feel. It's not where you are. I could feel a victim, or I could feel an agent of change. Same place. I'm still a woman. I'm still not paid equal. I'm still not fully included in boardrooms. I'm not. Yet, if I choose to be a victim, odds are I will not put into play actions that will promote change. If I'm a victim, I will take the abuse and complain. If I'm a change agent, if I choose not to be a victim, I can change because I'm a catalyst of the changes around me. This being said, creating safe spaces for somebody to say, yes, I feel like a victim, and not feel judged, because we've all been there. I've been there, and I sometimes go back there. And when I'm there, you know what? I tell everybody in the house, today's my victim day. Don't talk to me, because I'll bite.
I want that day.
You're my cause of my being victim. And now they know, so they avoid me for a day. And then I say, okay, I've been victim for a day. I feel better. Now, watch out, because the change is coming. Because if I felt a victim, that meant that there was something that was bothering me. I could choose to live with it, or I could choose to change it. If I start changing, odds are people will react to my change. It may not bring the absolute change I want, but it will bring something a lot more than just being a victim. So what Liesl said about being in a victim mode, we all were in a victim mode with this pandemic, because men, children, my kids, they're 20s, no social life for a year and a half.
Yeah.
My son has his girlfriend in another continent. A year and a half they don't see each other. It's driving me absolutely insane. You want to talk victim? The child is crucified. So you can choose. I mean, that's something that you cannot change, but you could plan for the change. So plan for the change. This is the things we need to do. We can choose to stay victims or choose to do something else. So
it's really powerful. And I know we're coming up to the hour, but I quickly want to get another question in. Now I'm coming back into the actual recruitment realm, but do hiring practices actually favor men? And can the same be said about promotions? Oh, Milva's laughing. Milva, what are you thinking?
I have a thought on it. And I must say that I'm fairly aligned with a Harvard professor who wrote a lot of books about this. And again, it's probably my background that leads me to think that yes. Yes, I think that there are certain traits that we look at when we hire that are more favorable to men. I'll 2 seconds, because I know we're coming to the end. If you have kids, boys and girls, odds are when they take an exam, girls will say, oh, it was awful, I didn't do well, and then they have like 95. When boys take an exam, it was a breeze, and then 70s. So the same exam, 2 groups of people, and I have it. Like, I have a really good sample in my family. Like, there's about 20 of them. The boys always act the same. The girls always act the same, generally speaking. That's a trait that is essential in shining in interviews. Because in interviews, men will say, I'm great. I can do well. You ask for 70, I could give you 120. Girls will tackle the same interview saying, you ask for 70, maybe I have 50, but in reality, they have 75. So those traits will come out in interviews. In gender, in general, we don't have predominant traits, except for one, narcissism, which is predominant in men. Narcissism plays a big role in this mechanism that I just illustrated. So yes, I think that until we look at people being overly confident in an interview, you will favor men in general. That doesn't steal away the thunder that women that are competent will shine, but because of that small little twist, we appreciate that more than we should, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think it plays out in so many other ways. The language of our job specs, the profiles that we put out. What words are we using? Are women just choosing not to respond to those words, or do those words, especially in technology, sound very male, and so they don't even apply in the first place for the role? Do we look at the candidate's picture? Do we do we look at their salary that they had before as the basis for their future salary, thereby just carrying on with the salary pay gap that existed, or do we have a set number for a role regardless of gender? There's so much in hiring that is biased against women. And I think, again, in promotions, if you have an organization where you say you should put yourself up for promotion, well, you just whammied women right there. You know, if you have an organization where you say you have to put yourself up for promotion at least once every 3 years, completely different scenario. That way you get men and women. If you just say you have to put yourself up for promotion, well, you know, you're going to see more men than women for exactly the point that Milva made. So we have to be very, very deliberate about some of the practices that we have in our organizations to ensure that we get the language right, to ensure that structurally the promotions process is fair.
But I think as women, we also got to get a little bit more comfortable, and I'll speak for myself here. I was always described, oh, you're too dominant, driven, right? All of those words. And when it's referred to a bloke, great. Women, oh God, she's too driven, she's too dominant. And something I've had to really get comfortable with and embrace is, hell, I'm driven. And I'm okay with that. And that's not a bad thing. So I think whilst, yes, as employers, you have, you know, an inclusive, a welcoming, and the languaging and things like that. But I also think as women, having those traits is a good thing. Don't walk away from it saying, oh my God, people think I'm too dominant, I'm too overbearing, I'm too driven.
And they were
Nothing
nice
wrong
to
with
you,
that.
Suki. They
Sorry?
were nice to you, Suki, because they didn't tell you that you were aggressive. They just told you
Oh,
were.
they've told me that one as well. Yeah. Yeah.
I've been told that I'm aggressive, but you know what? My answer is rather simple to that, is that, would you tell a man that he's aggressive?
Yeah.
Unless he punches you in the face?
Yeah.
No.
That's so true. And that's why I say we as women have to get comfortable. I'm so comfortable with it now. I say, well, if you don't like me, that's okay. That's okay. In fact, I was speaking to a really good friend of mine Monday, and him and I were talking, and I was telling, I was like, I've got so comfortable with saying, you know what, this is who I am. If that's creating a reaction in you, that's on you. That's about you rather than me. And I think as women, we got to get comfortable owning who we are. Now, I'm not saying bullying, smacking people in, that's not what I'm talking about. But just some of those traits that are addressed to men in a positive and a negative to women, we got to say no. What's wrong with being driven? What's wrong with being ambitious? What's wrong with wanting to provide for your family? What's wrong with any of that? And there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, Suki, when you're being what you're calling to whatever, it's passion. So just rephrase it. It's what you're seeing is not what you're seeing is my passion for the topic. Period.
Yeah.
You're passionate about it. You express it. Period.
But would a bloke have to say that? No.
But
right?
let's start educating people around us. You have a choice. You're either a victim or a change agent. Change agent, you can tell them, what is it that you are? You are passionate.
Yeah.
You are a believer. Period.
Yeah, and you know what? To be honest, I think as women, we got to get comfortable with, like, I'm very comfortable. I don't have to. I don't feel I want to, and I should have to.
Sure.
That's me just being comfortable, right? I finally am at that stage where I'm like, you don't like me, there's a door type of thing, right? Not a problem. And there's women that, yes, will have the approach you're talking about, that they feel that, you know what, here's an opportunity for me to educate somebody. Great, right? I think we got to, as women, we got to do what's comfortable for us and what that next step of growth for us is. And I want to leave on a point, and Roy's mentioned this a number of times, is a role when men start really recognizing the imbalance with women, one of the stages is when they have a daughter themselves. And Roy, we've had this conversation many a times, because it wasn't discriminating before or things like that. It just wasn't in the psyche and the awareness the way it is when you have a daughter, right? So and I think more and more men are opening up to that and looking at it like that. My husband, he's my daughter's biggest champion. Right, even when we've got two boys as well, and when they were a lot younger, they'd play soccer, football, right? And my daughter, we had this, what they always call this 3-second rule. My husband wouldn't let anybody tackle our daughter. She had 3 seconds to think what she was going to do, just so she could participate in the game, right? So I think men have a role to play in the house with their daughters, empowering them, letting them know that they can be whatever they want to be.
And we have another role also. We're mother of boys.
Yes,
We can
absolutely.
teach our boys better.
Yeah, good point.
Food for thought.
No, 100%, absolutely. So, ladies, this has been really interesting. We could keep going. So, on a finishing note, any final words, Liesl?
Let's just keep having the conversation.
Yeah.
Same here. Don't be afraid of words, and don't judge. Just try to understand.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to reach out directly to yourself, Milva, what's the best way for them to get hold of you?
LinkedIn message, no problem. I answer.
Perfect. Liesl?
Same.
Perfect. Well, ladies, thank you ever so much. I know we didn't get round to all of the questions on LinkedIn and what have you. So what I'll do is, if you two are okay with that, let's just go through them and answer and pick up the conversation. And on that note, thank you ever so much for joining us. And I will speak to everybody soon. Bye for now.
Bye.